A critical part of any music scene, any community really, is the journalism that covers it. Newport this week has been consistently a stalwart when it comes to coverage of Newport's music community. We think of Mark Gorman's long-running column in Newport this week, and now Julian Ciany has taken the reins as the music writer and columnist in Newport this week. Thanks so much for your time. Julian joins us this morning. Good morning.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. All right. So I think the best way to do this is for everybody to get to know you. Take us through your journey in terms of your background in Newport and also your background in the music world.
Sure, sure. Well, born and raised here, and the reason I am a musician is because of my dad. I always like to tell the story that, when I was 6 or 7 years old, I started banging on the table, and he put a pair of drumsticks in my hand instead and said, "Use these." And from there, it just took off. I was, growing up playing with him in the basement, playing Beatles songs, playing Jimi Hendrix songs, and then as I got into high school, I was starting my own bands, and then same in college. I was probably in 5 different bands my senior year of college, I think, if I remember correctly. And after college, I moved down to Nashville, and so I spent about just under a decade in Nashville, touring very heavily, seriously with a number of different bands. And actually, I don't mean to correct you, but I was doing the column before Mark Gorman,
Oh,
actually.
well, welcome back. That's awesome. So that would be probably before my time then in Newport. I didn't realize that. That's awesome.
Well, no, no, you're totally fine. It's so in my time of living in Nashville, I came back here for probably like a summer, little over, and I met with Lynn, and I started writing a couple of columns for Newport this week. I remember I did one on Bob Kendall, actually, and then I went back to Nashville, and that's when Mark Gorman took it over. And he really just went with it and did a lot of great things with it. So it's totally understandable that he's thought of as the first one on it. But yeah, so I went back to Nashville, did more touring, and then COVID hit, and it kind of forced me back here, where I took a little bit of a pivot. I still play music every day. I still practice drums every day. I'm still dedicated to playing all the time. But it was like, okay, what else can I do in the industry? So I started jobs as a booking agent. When I was in Nashville, I was booking a lot of my own bands, and in this pivot, it was kind of like, well, I have experience booking, so maybe I can do booking for artists in the domestic territories in North America, because that's kind of where my experience lies. And then Lynn also got in touch with me when she heard that I was back and I was looking for more work to do. And she said, let's start the column back up. So that's kind of what led it to where it is today. So yeah, I've just been pretty much picking back up where I left off on that.
It's You said a word there, pivot, during COVID, and that is, look, I mean, that is the word for basically all original, especially music artists, but even in general, anybody who's in the business. For me personally, it was a very similar thing. I mean, I was in New York for a decade doing on the indie circuit, touring internationally, doing the whole thing. You name it, waking up on floors in Buffalo, whatever it was. And COVID hit. And at some point, I was already doing this podcast, my own podcast. I was already doing journalism, but it became apparent that the industry was going to shift dramatically. And we're seeing that play out today, where a lot of mid-sized venues, even in Providence, the Columbus Theater, announcing they're closing in just a
Yeah.
couple of weeks. You take a look at Newport right now. I've made the argument, and I think it's unfortunate but true, that Newport, especially as an original music scene, has COVID was devastating. We lost a number of venues because of COVID or during COVID or around COVID. You think of places like Jimmy's, you think of a reduction in music. I heard from somebody yesterday that Zelda's is not going to have music anymore. Some places are scaling back. You look at Parlor, basically stopped being a music venue after it was the hub of original music. Poor Judgment had music 4 nights a week. Now it's twice a week, including your dad's band, the Los Deuterinos, on Sundays. In other words, music has really shifted. I think there's a generation of people that when they were 18 to 22, music was limited because of COVID and the surrounding issues. That may be a factor. People's attention spans may be a factor. It's still robust. There's still an opportunity to go out there and do it, but it's changed dramatically. With that background, how do you approach the work in 2024 as a music columnist in a music community that has a ton of talent, but has way less opportunities for people to perform than it did, say, when you were first writing this column?
Yeah, I think it just requires a little creativity and a little outside the box thinking. Your question makes me think of, older generations saying that there's no good music anymore today. And, I disagree. You just got to look for it. You got to be a little more in tune with what's going on. And it's the same kind of thing in Newport. I completely agree. It's taking a big hit. And, effects of late stage capitalism, I think, are, just
Right.
driving that force of original art and original music out of here because, I mean, artists can't really afford to live here anymore. Let's be frank. That's kind of the reality of what's going on. So, that being said, there's still snippets, there's still stuff. I still think there's stuff to highlight. And, being someone who's from here and who knows somewhat what's going on locally, I think it gives me a platform to kind of showcase what I do see. And at that same time, I try to, in a lot of my columns, I do try to take a little bit of that into consideration. What I was saying before, like the conditions. Well, what's going on in town? What's going on in the municipality that might be hindering more clubs, more venues popping up? Stuff like that. So I just think it just requires a little more dedication, a little more effort, research into, what's going on, having your feet on the ground. It is not as easy to find as it was because of everything that I'm describing, but it's there. It's there if you look for it.
Oh, I totally agree. And there's also been a sort of a boom in the underground scene in Newport that's been, again, always kind of part of the story, but it's now becoming more essential because of the reality with clubs, for lack of a better term. I don't even like to use that word, but that sort of frames it out a little bit. And, you see things like Nimfest or other larger scale events that they're starting to pivot with a little bit more of a focus on local original music. You said something there that I think is just so profound and so important. And I'm afraid that too few people understand this. Newport is a perfect case study in what happens when you said late stage capitalism. I use the term runaway capitalism. Look, Airbnb, if you own a house and you're bringing somebody in, you're making a little scratch on the side, that's great. But we see some of these folks who have scooped up dozens of properties. That's just
Mm.
one example of where this late stage capitalism has taken away housing, and that puts a squeeze on everybody all the way down to the artist housing. It was only in 2016-17 that if you walk down Spring Street at Broadway on any given night, you would see houses filled with artists, a creative engine. Newport was a creative engine. It was a hot spot on a global level. I mean, a miniature one, but it was real. Today, that's been really taken away by this oligarchy that's emerged. And a lot of people like to spike the football and say, boy, isn't this so great? Look at how wonderful Newport's doing from one standpoint. But from your experience touring, from being a part of different scenes, from being in Nashville, how dangerous is it for a community when you extract the artist element and expect for any sort of vibrancy or any sort of enduring legacy to exist? It seems like we're in a position right now with Newport. It feels a lot like what New York or Boston or even, frankly, Nashville and Austin feel like at the same time. And it's a dangerous place, I think.
Yeah, it's I mean, well, what I can say is I saw the same exact thing happen in Nashville. And it's you know, some of the most treasured venues, some of the most unique venues. You know, there I remember a record store in Nashville called Fond Object, one of my favorite places to go to because they had this beautiful backyard behind the shop in which they would have shows. And I remember when it was announced that they were closing, you know, it pretty soon after it's announced that they're going to put some Airbnbs and like just, you know, I like to call it four walls and a roof type of housing, just very quick, like get it up, you know, like so we can get people in there and renting it out right away. It's um it's destructive. It's what probably how do I phrase it? I think before COVID happened in Nashville, I was already getting ready to leave because I was just very disillusioned with what was going on and not everything wasn't surviving like it could be in such a musically rich town. This is Music City. Why are we prioritizing, you know, Amazon headquarters and all these you know, these very quick housing units over some of like the most culturally rich institutions of the town. And you know, I'm seeing it happen here slowly and slowly. So it's dangerous. And I think, you know, the arts hold such an importance in our times because, I mean, speaking for myself, it's a release, it's an escape. And if you get rid of that release and escape, you know, you disenfranchise so many people who, you know, find joy in going out to these events, going out to these shows and, you know, experiencing art, you know. So it's sad and I can't, I mean, we got to be persistent in trying to protect it, I guess, is, you know, and I see my column as playing a part in that. I see the work I do as a booking agent nationally playing a part of that, and not just the markets of Newport, but in markets all over the country. So yeah.
I completely 100% agree. And frankly, the journalism piece or the coverage piece, the media piece of any music scene, as I said, it's a critical part. I think it's the first thing I said in the podcast, but especially when you have a moment like this and you're there to be the mirror for the reality. And I'm excited because it sounds like you're ready to take on some of those institutions and challenges that really hamper music communities as they play out. I mean, not explicitly that would, you know, that's not what your mission is, but it's you're factoring it in, and that's so critical. Last question here, because I know we're already past the time we're allotted, and I appreciate you being on here. You know, from your standpoint right now, going into the summer season, um, how does the random tourist, the random person who's coming to Newport either because of sailboats or because they just want to go get lunch and or they've heard of Newport and it sounds cool. How does that random person who maybe doesn't even go see music in their hometown, how do you make them aware of the thriving music community in Newport? How do you reach that broader audience, I guess, with your work?
I guess just try to be, you know, as diverse as I can in terms of genres and styles. You know, for instance, a couple of weeks ago, I did something, I guess it was a couple months ago now at this point, but I did something on the We Own Land and Neutral Nation show at Rejects. So that kind of covers the punk, you know, harder rock side of things. And then just last week, I wrote a little thing up on John Monlos and what he does at Parasolato every day. So I'd say the easiest way to do that is by like just show not having a focused lens on any type of genre per se. Just say, look at everything there is here. Look at all we have. You know, take your pick. Go walk on Broadway, maybe catch some original bands. Or if you're looking to hear some talented people play some songs, you know, go down to the Pelham, you know, or walk around Thames Street. There's options abound.
Absolutely. read the column every week in Newport This Week, newportthisweek.com. Julian, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thanks so much, Bill. Thanks for having me.